Okay, let's kick off this explainer by acknowledging a slightly terrifying reality about the modern workplace. Today, companies aren't just trying to capture our time, they're kind of trying to capture our souls. Case in point, back in 2018, Amazon faced this massive scandal over patents for tracking wristbands meant for their warehouse workers. These devices could allegedly track a worker's hand movements down to the absolute centimeter, and they'd vibrate if someone reached for the wrong shelf. I mean, it literally sounded like a dystopian sci-fi movie come to life. And while that specific project caused a huge uproar, the underlying reality really hasn't changed. We're living in an era of extreme productivity tracking, and honestly, it's exhausting us on a fundamental level.
So, in today's explainer, we're going to trace the historical roots of your modern office fatigue. We'll look at the actual invention of the term burnout, dive into how labor transformed into a literal religion, examine the whole corporate cult phenomenon, unpack the modern global rebellion against overwork, and finally, get into the science-backed psychology of true motivation.
All right, Section 1. Let's start with a foundational concept that pretty much dictates how we view the modern workplace.
Be honest with me for a second. Have you ever felt that little pang of guilt just for taking some time off? Almost like you're committing a sin just by stepping away from your laptop? Well, you're not alone. Surveys actually show that 80% of remote workers check their email outside of work hours, and nearly half feel guilty when they take a vacation. We're somehow hardwired to feel bad about resting, but where does all this psychological exhaustion actually come from?
The origin of this is actually fascinating. Back in the 1970s, there was a psychoanalyst named Herbert Freudenberger. He was working with wealthy clients in New York by day and volunteering at a clinic for the homeless and addicted by night. And he noticed something striking. The young, passionate idealists volunteering at the clinic were completely losing their spark after a few months of relentless work. He actually borrowed the term burnout from drug slang because he realized something crucial. You don't need external substances to burn out. You can completely destroy yourself simply by working relentlessly, even if you absolutely love the job you're doing.
And guys, the stakes here are literally life and death. Expert estimates show overwork is a societal crisis claiming roughly 840,000 lives globally every single year. So we're not just talking about feeling a bit sluggish on a Friday afternoon. This is a lethal, systemic issue.
Which brings us to part 2. How did labor become a religion? Because humans definitely didn't always worship the grind.
If we trace this through history, there's a massive shift. In ancient Greece, philosophers like Plato and Aristotle basically viewed physical labor as a chore meant only for slaves, the ultimate goal of a free citizen, leisure and self-discovery. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and work was purely pragmatic. You made exactly enough shoes to supply your village and no more. Overproducing just didn't make any sense. The really massive rebranding of work happened in the 16th century, thanks to John Calvin. He basically pulled off the ultimate PR stunt by framing work as a sacred duty. Suddenly, wealth and relentless labor were seen as signs of divine salvation. Then, by the 20th century, figures like Frederick Taylor took that religious zeal and industrialized it, using literal stopwatches to turn human workers into highly optimized, measurable machines.
Now, entering part 3, we see how this religious devotion to work got weaponized by competing global superpowers. Here's the crazy part. Even though the US and the USSR were total ideological enemies in the 20th century, both systems completely impartially relied on the exact same extreme productivity metrics. Whether it was the US pushing consumerism and the American dream, or the USSR praising Stakhanovite superworkers to build some utopian future, they both eagerly adopted Taylor's scientific management. They essentially just wrapped the exact same grueling labor in totally different ideological packaging. Fast forward to today, and that weaponization of labor has evolved into what are basically modern corporate cults. Take WeWork, for example. It hit an absolutely staggering $47 billion valuation despite owning zero real estate. How on earth did they do that? Simply by selling the illusion of meaning to a whole generation of freelancers and remote workers. WeWork's founder, Adam Neumann, even pushed this mandatory, honestly kind of toxic mantra. He created an environment that swapped out fair pay and personal boundaries for free beer, ping pong tables, and this really pervasive "we are a family" culture. It was entirely designed to keep people in the office late into the night, blurring the lines between their personal lives and corporate exploitation. But there is a much, much darker conclusion to this extreme corporate devotion, perfectly captured by the Japanese term karoshi, which literally means death by overwork. We see this tragic reality in cases like Matsuri Takahashi at the Dentsu advertising agency. She was this brilliant young woman who took her own life after clocking over 130 hours of overtime in a single month.
And the heartbreaking part is, she didn't do it because she hated her work. She was trapped by the immense pressure and the sheer fear of letting her company down.
Moving to Section 4. This kind of systemic exploitation has inevitably sparked a massive global pushback. Workers everywhere are looking at this completely irrational social contract and rationally saying, nope. In the West, we've been calling it quiet quitting, doing exactly what you're paid for and absolutely refusing unpaid overtime. Over in China, there's this massive youth movement called lying flat, protesting the 99-6 culture, which is working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. It got famous when an exhausted factory worker named Lu just quit, got on a bicycle, rode to Tibet, and proudly posted pictures of himself literally lying flat. He chose to survive on a few dollars a month rather than feed the corporate machine.
And the data backs this up in a major way. A comprehensive global survey revealed that a staggering 63% of people are completely unengaged with their work, and another 24% actively hate their jobs. Let that sink in. That means 87% of the global workforce either doesn't care about their job or actively despises it. Plus, overworking doesn't even make mathematical sense. If we look at data collected all the way back during World War I manufacturing, it shows that after 50 hours of work a week, human productivity completely flatlines. Working 60 or 70 hours produces practically zero additional output. It literally just destroys the worker.
All right, final section. If the system is so broken and overwork is useless, how do the ultra-successful survive without burning out? It all comes down to your psychological fuel. Psychologists divide this into two camps. First, there's controlled motivation. That's when you work out of fear of your boss, shame, or financial desperation. It's a dirty fuel, and it inevitably leads to a crash. Then there's autonomous motivation, which is driven by internal passion and purpose. Think about it like this. Are you hauling heavy bricks because someone is threatening you with a whip? Or are you carrying those exact same heavy bricks because you're finally building your dream house? The physical weight is identical, but the psychological toll is completely different.
There's this famous psychology experiment with Legos that perfectly nails how fragile that motivation can be. Participants were paid to build Lego models. For one group, the finished models were simply taken away. But for the other group, researchers dismantled the models right in front of their eyes before asking them to build another one. And guess what? The motivation for that second group plummeted 1.5 times faster. Destroying the meaning of someone's work right to their face is absolutely the fastest way to kill their drive.
Even billionaires intuitively get this. Look at Warren Buffett. He's not pulling these insane 14-hour hustle grinds. He spends his days calmly reading 5 newspapers, drinking Coca-Cola, and playing bridge. Science actually shows that deep, intellectual work maxes out at about 4 to 5 hours a day, operating in 90 to 120-minute cycles. The human brain literally needs downtime to process information. You can't just power through it forever.
Way back in 1930, the economist John Maynard Keynes made this wild prediction. He thought that by the 21st century, we'd have a 15-hour work week. He realized that, for the first time in human history, technological progress would give us the terrifying privilege of choosing what to do with our lives, rather than just struggling to survive. Now, obviously, we haven't hit the 15-hour mark yet, but that existential question is still staring us right in the face. So let's wrap this explainer up with a question for you. Picture yourself sitting in a rocking chair at 80 years old, looking back on everything. Are you really going to care about your quarterly performance reviews, or how many late-night emails you answered? Probably not. Finding your autonomous motivation, figuring out what actually matters to you beyond the metrics of a corporate cult, is absolutely the ultimate key to avoiding burnout and living a life that is genuinely yours. Just something to think about the next time you feel guilty for closing your laptop.